Howdy, friends. Welcome to Americana Station. I'm Emily Smith, filling in for Will Payne Harrison and India Ramey today. I've got an incredible guest for you today, Jessye DeSilva. Their new album, Landscapes, drops on April 12th, and it's just a beautiful record from beginning to end. Prior to the interview, I had only heard some singles that had been released, but I've heard the whole album now. I listened to it all the way through as a whole, and wow, there are so many stellar tracks. It's just hard to even pick your favorite. And while the album leans into Americana, it's certainly genre bending. You'll hear influences from 70s folk and rock, incredible instrumentals, and Jessye's gorgeous vocals carry you all the way through. They have a lot of practice in that area as assistant professor of voice at the conservatory at Berklee College of Music. And I want you to know that even though I hadn't heard the entire album prior to this interview, don't worry. We had plenty to talk about. And I think you'll get a peek inside the person behind the music, which for me is always the best part about interviewing artists. I do want to preface this interview with a trigger warning. Jessye's very open about their struggles with mental health. In this interview, we discuss issues including anxiety, depression, and eating disorders, which may be triggering for some. Personally, as someone who struggles with these issues, I am so very thankful for Jessye's openness, both in this interview and on the album. I find comfort in lyrics that make me feel less alone and make me feel connected in the same way that I do with people. And I believe you're going to find comfort and healing through Landscapes when it's released on April 12th. And I enjoyed feeling not alone listening to this record and chatting with Jessye. With that said, let's jump right in to the interview. Well, I first want to thank you because I really enjoyed listening to the first two tracks that have been released off the album. I know I'm not alone in this, but hearing your music really resonated with me because I've been going through the same sort of processing through the pandemic, processing things from my childhood. And even though my experience is different than yours, I really felt it in your music. And I think it's going to touch a lot of people. So I'm excited to get the word out on it. Can you tell me a little bit about the new single that's out, Hibernate? Which is exactly what I call what I do when I fall up in my blanket during the winter time. Can you tell me about the process of writing that and where that came from?
Yeah. Well, personally, I think I have always had a bit of a difficult time in the winter time, especially since moving up to Boston. We've been in Boston about 5 years now. It seems like it's far enough north that we get, like a half hour less of sunlight even than when we lived a little bit further south in Philly. And I think the last couple winters have been extremely hard, with quarantine and just sort of the stress of everything that's going on in the world. I feel like every week is another existential crisis for me. But this winter in particular was really tough for my partner. My partner has really been struggling with his depression, especially with the seasonal things. And I think there was a week where things were really rough, and I felt like I happened to be in a good enough place at that time to kind of like pick up the slack a little bit for him, just in our house, and just sort of be like, okay, you do what you need to do. Like, I'll make sure the dog gets fed, and I'll make sure, the dishes are done, and which they sound like little things, but I think that when you're the person who's really struggling to just like get out of bed and do the bare minimum and show up to work, I think that having someone who's able to do those things can be really huge. And so that's the place I wrote this song from. I felt a little weird, sort of. I was like, okay, it's going to go on this album that's for spring release, but at the same time, it felt kind of appropriate to be bringing this single out, like as the spring has just begun. Because I also think that like depression doesn't really have like a season, I think that like, even though this song kind of talks about hibernation and the winter and, the beginning of spring, I think like we need to hibernate at all different times. And sometimes you just need someone to be like, okay, take the time you need. And just, like, don't get out of bed and keep your sweats on and take the space that you need to feel ready to come back into the world. So
that's so huge. And I mean, I know it is spring, or spring is coming, but it's still overcast where I am in Tulsa. I'm still like in that phase of depression where it's like, I don't want to get out of bed. And I'm lucky to have a partner too that's supportive. And I think that's huge. And for people that don't have that, it's heartbreaking because it's hard to get through the day when you're like that. And I just really resonated with this song. On a little bit lighter note, why did you choose crocuses? I didn't even know that was a flower. I had to look it up.
Oh, well, so interestingly, so crocuses are, at least in the Northeast, I don't really know much about where they are indigenous to, but in the Northeast, like crocuses are these little flowers that they're usually like the first sign of spring, and they kind of like bloom. Sometimes you'll see them kind of peeking through the snow, early. Interestingly, I didn't pick it for this reason, but my first album that I kind of DIY'd was called Hoarfrost and Crocus Shoots, and it was titled after kind of just this idea of like cycles of growth and death and rebirth and all that stuff. So I don't know. I really like crocuses for that reason, just because they're this like sign of new beginnings. I actually have like a couple. This is a podcast, so you won't be able to see, but I have a couple tattooed on my arm.
Okay.
So yeah,
they're
I don't know.
An important flower to you.
I guess so.
I just had never heard of them. I had to Google it. I knew it was a flower just based on the lyrics of the song, but I was like, I want to see this flower. We have like redbud trees here. That would probably be like the equivalent in Oklahoma. That's like the first thing to bloom here.
Yeah.
Anyway,
these are just these little like ground flowers that,
they're pretty. I looked at them. Little purple.
Yeah, I mean, they're wild in certain places, but I think you can also like get bulbs and plant them. I don't know. I'm not very good. I have a very brown thumb, so I'm not one to talk about flowers and gardening. But
I'm trying to learn. I have house plants. I got a lot of house plants during the pandemic, which isn't good when you have depression. But that's another story.
You and everyone else.
Right. Something else I've learned about recently is like burnout recovery, which I didn't realize was a thing and can take like years, and is something that people study. And I feel like a lot of us went through this like emotional processing during the pandemic that caused burnout. And I think a lot of us are just completely burnt out at this point. And I just feel like I felt that kind of vibe in your songs that I've heard so far off the album. I don't know. It just resonated with me. So I wanted to call that out. The other single you've released so far is Siren Song. And I related with the lyric screening calls from all my old friends, because I feel like a lot of us went through a change during the pandemic, and it's hard to kind of like be the person that we were before this all happened. And I know a lot of people found new communities online during the pandemic. Is that something you were thinking about as you wrote this song?
Yeah. I mean, I think if not consciously, I think it's just kind of all there. You know, I think the journey that we kind of all went through in the past, I don't know, what is time even? 2 years, 3 years? I don't know.
Been a long time.
I think you're right. I think like we've all kind of changed. I think that I've kind of gone through these different phases in terms of like what community and socialization even like means to me. I think there have been times where early in the pandemic, just getting to see someone's face on a computer screen like meant so much, because we felt, I felt so isolated. And then there were times where, everything was on Zoom and we were fatigued and we like needed to kind of like cocoon ourselves even more. But yeah, I mean, I think like, I don't know about you, but I found a really beautiful sense of community, online in the past couple of years, just with other artists and other musicians, specifically other queer, like Americana and country musicians.
Right.
The sort of intersections with the queer Americana community and the BIPOC Americana community has been like really healing to me. And in some ways, some of those folks that I've kind of connected with have become some of my best friends. Yeah. I was just down in Tennessee, last week. I teach, so I have spring break. So I was like, I'm going to take a spring break kind of like mini Tennessee tour. And I got to spend some time with, Adim the artist, who's someone you folks have had on this show before. Right. Adim and I connected early in the pandemic and have been, I mean, I can't speak for Adim, but I know that Adim has been a really great kind of support system for me throughout all of this. Just someone to talk about mental health with, someone to talk about gender and queerness with, and how these things all intersect with the country music community.
Right.
So yeah, I feel like I've meandered a bit from your question.
No, but that's good. That's why I want to hear that. I did notice that the queer community was really coming together during the pandemic, and then the BIPOC community with things like Black Opry and country queer. And I love seeing that happen because I've been covering this style of music for a really long time, but I never really created a community. So it was more just me listening to the music by myself. So even just watching it happen online, I love like seeing all the artists meet each other and like, you know, do things together or collaborate together. I saw a video you did where you got to play with Aaron Lee Chasjan, which I thought was pretty incredible. How was that for you? Is he a friend of yours? Is that a collaboration that'll happen again?
Yeah, I think that whole thing was, so I feel like these two things are kind of related because, you know, coming together and finding this community with the queer country community and sort of then seeing, I wouldn't say that I'm not part of the BIPOC country community or Black Opry because I'm a white person, but again, these intersections in community of sort of marginalized artists trying to kind of make a name for themselves in the country and Americana scenes has been such a healing and exciting thing. It's also been really beautiful just as someone in the music community at all, which can feel like a really impossible space. It can feel like finding success can seem so insurmountable. And then being able to kind of watch like folks like the Black Opry folks like Jet Holden, and Holly, who started Black Opry, and Roberta Lee, and these artists whose music I love, but also who I've been able to kind of make even small online connections. Watching them have these successes is really healing just as an artist as well, because it's like sometimes these things can feel totally impossible, let alone if you're part of a marginalized community. Right. And so to see Black Opry really thrive has just been this beautiful, inspiring, amazing thing, even just to kind of watch from the sidelines as someone who's not part of the community.
Right.
And so I think that these connections and connecting with other independent artists kind of like made that kind of veil between that internet veil kind of a little thinner. And so like, I guess maybe a year or so ago, I think I tweeted at or Instagrammed Aaron Lee Chasjan and was just sort of like, hey, could we be friends? And I was like sort of joking. And he just like tweeted back and was like, yes, let's be friends. And then we just started kind of DMing and kind of messaging each other and just kind of chatting about stuff. At one point, you know, I saw that he was coming up to Boston and I bought a ticket and I DM'd him again. And I was like, hey, like, you know, I'm really excited to see your show. Like, we had been talking and at one point he had said something like, oh, you know, I have family up in New England and like, you know, we should, if I'm ever up there, we should like hang out or something. And I was like, okay, Aaron Lee Chasjan, like, but when I messaged him and said that I was coming to his show, he was like, I want to have you like on stage for something. Like you should come to the sound check. Like, just like text, he gave me his phone number and he was like, text me, you know, about a week before the show so we can like set something up. And I was like, okay, this is so weird and generous. Cause, you know, to me, Aaron Lee Chasjan is an artist that like I was a fan of long before I started like actually talking to him as just a fellow human being. But I was kind of like, why would you ever just like want me to come and like mooch off of your show? But cool. So, Yeah, I mean, it was wonderful. Like I went to sound check. We like hung out. Like I hung out with sort of the whole tour crew. Erica Blynn was on tour, kind of playing guitar with him, and we like went out for ramen before the show, like between sound check and the show. We just kind of like walked around Boston. It was super fun. And I played Angel from Montgomery because I had a cover of that out on Spotify at the time. And Rich Hinman, who's an incredible pedal steel player, who's also a friend of Aaron's, and works with folks like Katie Lang. He was also sitting in that night. And so I got to like play Angel from Montgomery with Aaron Lee Tasjian, Erica Blynn on guitars, and Rich Hinman, who's like one of the best pedal steel players out there. Wow. just playing along. It was pretty surreal. And it was so generous of them because, you know, it's really hard to be an opener. I didn't have to open. I had this warmed up, primed, friendly crowd, and I got to jump up in the middle of the show, you know, right. And everyone was super into it. It was beautiful, and it was one of the kindest things that any other musician has ever done. And, you know, it's been my experience since then that Aaron Lee Tasjian is just a very kind, generous musician who is really invested in kind of helping other musicians along the way, and just kind of doing whatever he can. When I told him that I was coming down to Nashville, he, you know, he connected me with a friend of his, Anthony DaCosta, who has a residency at Dee's, and was like, hey, like, you should have my friend Jessye do like a guest set. So, yeah, he's just been really, really kind and really generous at just trying to connect me with whomever he thinks might vibe with me, and right. Trying to kind of just like help me in ways that I think he thinks are very little ways, but for me are very huge. Because again, like, I think we're all trying to kind of make it on our own. And I think that a lot of times there aren't people to just kind of help you out or like give you an inside tip or just connect you with people. I think it's not that people aren't generous. It's just that like, it's hard enough to be an artist and make it on your own.
Right.
So I think like a lot of people aren't invested in helping each other, but he, at least in my experience, has been really invested in that. And yeah. And he's also just a really funny, fun, cool guy to hang out with. And one of the most incredible performers, if you haven't seen him live, like, he's just ridiculous.
I haven't seen him live on his own or since he started doing like Americana music. A long time ago, I used to work with BP Fallon, who was his manager, and he was in another band, and the name is escaping me right now, but they played in New York, and I saw them at South by Southwest. He wasn't the front person, but he played guitar, and I can't think of the name of the band right now, but I've been aware of Aaron Lee Tasjian for a long time. And I love that, you know, he's been in the industry and he's able to help artists, and I see how kind he is just from online. I don't know him personally. Yeah. But I love that. I love the, not gatekeeping, like just helping. Like I've been there.
Like the opposite of gatekeeping.
The exact opposite of gatekeeping. Yeah. It's really cool to see.
He also really inspired me. This happened, when was this? I guess I was still in the process of like making the album. Was this last summer, last spring, last fall? I don't know. Time again.
Yeah, I have no idea.
He really inspired me because he's been sort of put in the Americana umbrella because he just went to Nashville and his first album was super Americana kind of forward. But his most recent album is like kind of like this eclectic hodgepodge of like right. There's
it's kind of psychedelic even.
Yeah, it's psychedelic. Yeah. There's kind of some synth pop mixed in there. And so that was also really inspiring to see him as a performer, because even when this was sort of like a stripped down, it wasn't like a full band tour that I kind of saw him on. It was mostly solo acoustic. But again, like Erica was there kind of also filling out the sound with acoustic guitar. but even in that setting, all of his influences kind of show, in the way that he plays the guitar. Those psychedelic influences show. There's like a little bit of kind of, I would say, like Prince vibes in his soloing, and even like Jimi Hendrix. And I think that really inspired me too, to kind of get out of this idea that when I write and record, I have to be like thinking, okay, I'm making this next kind of Americana hit, right? It started to help me kind of, let all my other kind of weird influences, like I grew up loving Tori Amos and, loving a lot of like 70s folk rock that my parents listened to. And so I think on this record, even though it still is, I think, a solid kind of Americana record, I was not trying to box myself in with genre when I was writing and when I was recording. I was trying to kind of just let whatever influences come out. And I really credit him as a big, not influence, but influence, but inspiration in that sense. Cause I think he's really decided in recent years to just kind of not to he even mentioned being inspired by Yola, who calls herself genre fluid.
I like that.
Yeah.
Just mixing in a lot of different things. When I was stalking your YouTube videos, I also saw your Tiny Desk concert that you had. I guess it's for the contest, right?
Yeah.
Entry, and it was of your song 10,000 Things. Yeah. Is that going to be on the album?
It is on the album.
It is on the album. Okay. That one to me was more Tori Amos-y, or more Broadway even. It didn't have as much of that Americana vibe to it, but I loved it. I was just singing along. Like I'm singing that song now. It's a fun one to sing along to. I'll be looking forward to hearing the version on the album. Do you want to talk a little bit about that track?
Yeah, totally. That's actually one of my favorite tracks, and one of my favorites. I mean, it's weird to say your favorite songs that you've written, but I guess I'm at the point where I actually like the songs I'm writing, which is probably a good thing. That was one too that was sort of a contender for being a single, because not even that it's super catchy, but just that I really love what we did production wise with it. And I feel like the story is really important to me. And I co-wrote it with my friend Alex Calabrese, who is, the frontman for, a group called Old Tom and the Lookouts, which is a Boston based, kind of, indie folk pop sort of, group that I also play with sometimes. We co-wrote that song. And it's about, for me, another thing that I've been kind of exploring, in my mental health journey has been kind of revisiting, a history that I have with an eating disorder, that I would have said maybe a year ago, I would have said, oh, I had an eating disorder when I was a teenager. And one of the things that I've kind of learned is no, I have an eating disorder. I never really treated it. I never really, sort of healed fully from that. And, what I'm learning is that even though I may not be, I may not look a certain way in terms of my weight, or I may not sort of be restricting as much food as possible all the time, I still have a lot of those habits that have been becoming ingrained in my life, and how I cope with anxiety has often been kind of restricting food, or skipping meals, or binging. I guess I should have probably prefaced this with a bit of a trigger warning. Maybe that's something that you could do at the beginning of when you do your official intro. But yeah, I've struggled for most of my life with body dysmorphia, which is sort of, where you either can't see yourself the way others see yourself, or you see yourself in a very specific way, no matter what reality is. And it's weirdly become, I think, heightened over the pandemic, which you wouldn't think so, because you think if you're not out as much in public, or you're not, if you're alone in your house, maybe those things would be a little less intense. But for whatever reason, probably because of anxiety, because a lot of body dysmorphia and eating disorders are kind of symptoms of other anxiety. It's been something that has kind of flared up a lot and kind of resurfaced in my life. Excuse me. And in my own work with my therapist, one of the things that we were talking one day and I was saying, this is like noise that's always there. The eating disorder is always there. And so every day I have this kind of like noise kind of making me self-conscious of how I look or worrying about how others are perceiving me. And it's like some days the noise is really loud and it's all I can think about. And some days it's a little quieter. Some days it's okay. Some days I can go about my day, and some days I can even say like, ooh, I feel good about myself today, but it's still there, right? Yeah. Like even on those days where I feel good about myself, there's also this voice kind of being like, oh, don't feel too good about yourself. Like, right. Maybe what you saw in the mirror isn't really there, And one of the things that I've noticed is that when I am creating, when I'm either writing or recording or performing or even teaching, I teach voice at a conservatory here, and I would consider teaching also a creative endeavor. When I'm really in that place of creativity, this noise I feel like kind of the noise of body dysmorphia and sort of bad self-image kind of quiets a little bit. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think that, even though I really struggle with self-esteem and self-image, I think that one of the things that I really am proud of is, my musicianship and my ability to write and my ability to sing and just make music. So it sort of tempers that. And so that's what that song is. That was a really long way of saying that that's what that song is about.
I love how open you are. And I relate to everything you're saying. I have an eating disorder as well. So, I hear you. I've put on 75 or 80 pounds during the pandemic. It's like outrageous because I've been depressed. So when I'm depressed, I eat. When I'm anxious, I control what I eat.
Exactly. I very much vibe with that. And I think sometimes people don't, I think that either people who don't have eating disorders or people who maybe, doubt their own experience and aren't sure if what they're experiencing is sort of a valid thing. I think what people don't know is that it doesn't always look like one way or the other. I very much resonate with the idea that when I'm feeling anxious, I restrict. And restriction for me also can mean, trying to eat healthy. It doesn't just, for me, it doesn't just mean like starving myself carte blanche. Yes. It can mean like, oh, I need to get my health in order. I need to start counting calories, or I need to, exercise every single day. And if I don't exercise every single day, then I'm going to fall back into a bad routine. Right. For me, that is also, those are symptoms of disordered eating, which is what a lot of people would say is like, oh, that's being healthy. And then when I'm feeling depressed, then I tend to go the opposite way. I kind of comfort myself with food. I think for me, both of those things, either of those ends of the spectrum really are about me just not being present and not wanting to just be present with myself. Right. And so that's what sort of in the song I say, like, it's just one of 10,000 little things between myself and me, meaning like, this is just one other way that I try to separate myself from myself and kind of, I try to kind of, it's a way of me, just not being present with my own sense of identity and my body. Right. And so sort of the antidote to that, which is sort of in the bridge, I talk about the bridge is like turning up the sound of my own music and kind of the music that's in me. I say like, turn up the sound of music in my bones. And I've carved myself a home out of 10,000 little things. So I'm always trying in my work to kind of, not put a silver lining necessarily on things that are painful, but to kind of make this connection that this thing that is painful can also be really beautiful. And like when
there's a hopefulness in your music, I think. Like I'm relating to it and it's like sad in a way, but then at the end of the songs, I feel hopeful.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad because that's kind of what that, you know, the artists that have always been really important to me have done that. You know, like Dolly Parton, even her earlier stuff that is often really sad, you know, it still has some hope in it. Or even if the songs don't have hope, you then like see her interviewed and she's such a hopeful person. So, Stevie Nicks is another artist that's been really, really, kind of monumental in my development as an artist and a human being. And she's another one who almost every song, even like breakup songs that she has, there's some element, some kernel of like hope that's like, I might feel really shitty right now, but like, I know I won't feel that way forever. And I know that this is just part of life and that it's a cycle and that, you know, even though I'm feeling really bad, something good is going to happen.
I'm a big, Stevie Nicks fan as well. And I keep wanting to call your album Landslide instead of Landscapes for some reason. And I keep telling myself before the interview, okay, it's Landscapes, because I want to call it Landslide. But I saw your cover of Landslide as well. And that was so beautiful. I just wanted to throw that in. I'm a fan of your music and hers. And I see that. I saw so many people compare you to lots of different artists, and I'm not a voice teacher, but what I heard, if we're doing comparisons, I kept hearing James Taylor, like in your cadence. I don't know. I kept getting James Taylor vibes on a little bit of some of your music, and I like James Taylor.
That's a really interesting one because I've had to kind of make peace with that because I don't dislike, I feel very nostalgic about James Taylor because I think of him as like my dad's music. Right. Yeah. So there's part of me that's like, oh God, like people are comparing to me. Like I think of James Taylor as like a dad. I very much identify him with my own father. But the thing is that I grew up listening to him. He was a really, really important artist to my dad. You know, it's like there's certain like Fire and Rain and Sweet Baby James. And, I guess they're both on the same record, right? Fire and Rain is, that album is really kind of nostalgic and important to me. And so I don't necessarily, I guess it's one of those things where I don't think of James Taylor as like a very conscious influence for me because he's not necessarily like a favorite artist of mine that I'm trying to emulate, but at the same time, it's just one of those other instances where like your influences are more than just the people you listen to on repeat. Like you absorb stuff from your childhood. You absorb stuff from like the music that just happens to be playing on the background in the radio or whatever. So yeah, I've grown to love that comparison because he is such a masterful songwriter and he's such a huge, figure just in kind of the music of the 70s, and that sort of folk revival that happened in the late 60s and 70s where folk music was pop music, which is kind of wild to think about, you know, like. Right.
I like that. I feel like it's kind of maybe going back that way, or maybe I'm in just too weird of a bubble, but I just see this shift where Americana and folk and things like that are starting to get a little more traction. And
I mean, Brandi Carlile is probably like one of the biggest celebrities in just popular music right now. And she is a folk Americana country. I mean, what is she? Folk Americana rock.
Something
country.
Like that.
She's all those.
A melding. Yeah.
But I think you would put her under the folk umbrella, and she's, I think, become a pretty mainstream artist, which is so exciting for me to see because she's one of my favorite folks. And again, like, I think anytime we see an Americana kind of artist kind of like breaking through into the mainstream, I hope that we celebrate that rather than.
I've noticed like these little pods. Oh, sorry. I interrupted, but I've noticed these like little pods forming, which reminds me of like the 70s and the folk vibe, how there was like stuff going on in California, and here in Tulsa, where I live, we had Leon Russell and JJ Cale, and they'd fly out to California and work on an album. Tom Petty created an album here, but he was based in Gainesville, Florida, and everybody had their little scenes going on, but they all helped each other. And that, I have no idea how that happened so well without internet, but I kind of see that happening again, where everybody's starting to connect and work on each other's albums. And it's like these little pods of folk and Americana are forming all across the country. And I get excited watching it.
Yeah. I mean, I think they've always kind of been there, but I think you're right. I think that there are sort of like, there have been like cycles where those pods have always been there, right? Like there are always local scenes. But I think, again, like the idea of like collaboration within those scenes, I think is something that kind of has kind of historically come and gone. And I also really appreciate that, because for me, collaboration and working with other artists is like, that's really all I want to do. I don't have a lot of interest anymore in my life in terms of just like holding up in my studio and just kind of like being this like solo artist. I want to make music with other people. And I've been really fortunate to find a great kind of Americana scene up here in Boston and sort of greater New England. It's always kind of been a thing, right? The Cambridge folk scene is like where folks like Dar Williams and Tracy Chapman and some of those folks in the 90s kind of cut their teeth out here. And it really is still very much alive. It's a beautiful thing to see kind of communities and like pods, like you said, of just collaboration. Now what I'm kind of sort of like interested in is kind of expanding my pod, and so that was one of the reasons why I wanted to go down to Nashville and Knoxville, is kind of to nurture some of those relationships that I kind of found myself in online, and start to kind of like be like, okay, like let's now be like real life friends, yes. and let's like make music, together. So I hope to do kind of even more of that. I hope to I'm always hoping for more collaboration with new folks. As much as I love the folks that I regularly work with. So. Right.
I know you have your release show coming up on the 21st, and that's at the Boston Harbor Distillery. Tickets are still available for that. I saw online just a few left. So if you are in Boston, you need to go get those tickets. Do you have other tour dates coming up that you're excited about, or what's on the horizon for you? We'll just ask that. Tour dates or any collaborations or things you're working on?
Yeah. Right now I'm I was just talking about this the other day with Adine. Like, I feel like I was so unsure, 2021 was still a really weird time for touring and live music. And especially locally in Boston. So I think I sort of like was very cautious in terms of booking things. And I just sort of realized that I put so much, focus and emphasis on the Nashville mini tour and just this release show that I kind of did not book a big release tour, a big promo tour. So that is still kind of something that I'm trying to figure out, is sort of what the summer and fall are going to look like. So I would say stay tuned, because I do have some things in the works in terms of both local and then sort of not super far away, but expanding again out of like the New England area. But yeah, I mean, like, just keep an eye out for the album. I don't know when this episode is going to air, but that's coming in April. And I hope to have some more shows after that to kind of promote that. And otherwise, I'm thinking ahead about what the next album is going to be. I'm already kind of writing for it. I'm already kind of just trying to figure out where it's going to take place and with whom. And, there's always stuff on the horizon, even if not concrete. I wish I had something more like, yes, this is coming. But for now, I'm focusing a lot on just kind of trying to do this album justice and make sure that it gets the attention and from me and the release attention that it deserves, I hope.
Yeah, that's always the piece of the puzzle. Like I'm going to do what I can to get your music out there. I'm going to push Will to get this episode out before the album comes out. And like I said in the beginning, I connected to everything I've heard so far. And I just feel like it will really touch people if it gets to the right ears. So I want to be a big part of helping you get the word out on that.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you want to talk about regarding the album and, just anything like overarching themes or, last minute thoughts on it?
So I think for me, the overarching theme, both in the songs and the music itself, and in the way that I made it, is connection and community and collaboration. I think that's just kind of where my brain has been coming out of, as we like dig out of our little caves, both our pandemic caves and our winter kind of hibernation caves, is just like wanting to reconnect, wanting to connect with listeners, which is why it's so beautiful to hear you say the things that you've said about my music. Like, I think, I tell my very intimate personal story, not to be like, hey, look at me, but to be like, hey, I hope that something I say can help you feel like you're not as alone, and that like there are other people out there kind of struggling and kind of just pushing through and trying to get by. But also the way that I recorded the album, the way that we worked on it was, we wanted to make music together. So even though it's a solo record and I don't have a band with a name, it's very much a band record. It's very much about the guys that I make music with on a regular basis. My friend Alex Calabrese, I mentioned, he's co-writer. He plays acoustic guitar on the album. My friend Daniel Jung, who is a great Berkeley grad from up here, and he plays electric. He's a master. Jacob Thompson is my drummer, also a grad of Berkeley, and my producer and best friend and also bass player on the record, Matt Malakowski, who's worked with a lot of great New England and national artists as well. We just decided that we didn't want to be coming in alone and sitting in a booth overdubbing parts. Like, we wanted to just play the record. And so that's what we did. Most of the record was just live recorded. We're just in different booths, but all playing at the same time as a band. And I hope that kind of immediacy and vibrancy of people really making music in real time, I hope that comes across, because that was one of the things that I missed the most when we were all in quarantine, was just not being able to play music with another human being in the same room.
Yeah. I always love those albums more that are recorded all together. There's just more of a realness, or, just has that more like warm feel to it.
Yeah.
I just dig it so much. So I'm excited.
It really sparked our creativity too, because, we couldn't really agonize over little details and like fixing everything. So at the end of the day, we would do like 4 or 5 takes of a song, and then we would all go into the control room with Matt and just kind of come to some sort of consensus and be like, well, this was the take. This was the one. And it's funny because you would think that might lead to like arguments or people, but it actually, pretty much every time we went in and we were like, oh, it was the third one. Like, cause we just felt it in the moment. We were like, yeah,
right.
That was the one. We would listen to it through and be like, yep, yeah, that was the one. And the only thing, there were just a couple parts, like the pedal steel parts and the mandolin and stuff. Those folks weren't there, and so they kind of did it on their own. And I did go through on the very last session and just do like 3 vocal takes. I sang the whole album like 3 times, just to make sure the vocal takes were good. But apparently Matt did not comp any of my vocals, which I feel kind of weird about, but like also I'm kind of like, hey, so every track on the album, even the vocal take, is just one full take.
Wow.
That he just was like, this is the take, which I think is pretty unusual these days. We tend to like auto-tune, which auto-tune is a great tool, but we tend to auto-tune and comp and make everything as perfect as possible. And, you know, while I hope that the album isn't, I don't think it's sloppy, but it's definitely not like fine-tooth comb perfection. We wanted it to just feel real. Yeah. Like the emotions and the things that we're talking about. So the whole thing is just, it's about community and connection and making music and living life and being in community with other human beings, which I think is a thing that a lot of us felt was missing for a couple of years. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And I look forward to the album release. For all of the listeners that didn't jot everything down, go back and listen to all of the songs we talked about, all the YouTube videos, or just go stalk Jessye DeSilva online like I did. And you can learn all the things, too.
Yeah, I'm just Jessye D Music on Instagram and Twitter. And Jessye is spelled Jessye, which is a little unusual. So Jessye D as in DeSilva Music. That's my Instagram and Twitter handle, and I believe Facebook as well. So you can find me on all the places.
Thank you so much for hanging out for the show today. I am so stoked for the release of Landscapes on April 12th. If you are in the Boston area, get to that show on April 21st for the record release. I would 100% be there if I could. Listening back to the interview, I feel like I need to say that the band I was trying to think of that Aaron Lee Tasjan was in is called Semi-Precious Weapons. You should look them up. Of course, it came to me like immediately after I got off the call. And as Jessye said, please go look into more of their music. JessyeDmusic.com. Jessye is spelled Jessye, dmusic.com. You'll find links to Bandcamp, Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. And I told you, I like getting to know the person behind the music. Following artists on Instagram and Twitter is a great way to do that. Aside from keeping up with their latest happenings, you can interact with them directly, get to know them. And maybe, like Jessye ended up on stage with Aaron Lee Tasjan, you could end up on stage with Jessye DeSilva. Thank you again, friends, for hanging out for Americana Station. I'm Emily Smith. I'll see you back here next time.